the way to avoid doubting our power is to realize that we also have a gift. And there is so many different ways that we can share that gift with the world. So I'll give an example. We are using the term busy as an excuse for not focusing on what is most important in our lives. It is a nice way to distract ourselves from the fact that maybe our life isn't where we want it to be. And so we use the fact that we're busy as a reason to justify.
Welcome back to another episode of the Being Yourself Show, where world's renowned thought leaders, best-selling authors share their wisdom and insight with you so that you can achieve better productivity and be a better version of yourself. If you're new to this channel, then you may consider subscribing for your regular dose of knowledge, wisdom, and inspiration. My name is Ajay, and my guest today is an author, entrepreneur, and a speaker. His first book, called Energize, has got praises from the likes of Simon Sinek, Murray Farley, and Keith Ferrazzi, just to name a few. And believe it or not, the book was released yesterday, and today it is Amazon #1 bestseller. And I'm going to put a screenshot here, definitely. So the book is all about energy, and that's what we're going to talk about today, how to keep our entire day energetic. And we have none other than talking about it, the author of Energize, Make the Most of Every Moment, Simon Alexander Ong. Simon, welcome to the show.
Ajay, thank you so much for having me on your show today.
Thank you for being here. And my first question with most guests is, what is your inspiration? What's your story? Why did you end up writing a book about energy?
Sure. Well, speaking to the book directly, I started my career in the financial services sector at what was probably the worst time possible. This was the middle of 2007, a year before the financial crisis of 2008. And I had big hopes and dreams. I told my father at the time that I would start work at this company. I would try and get promoted. I would move up the ladder. And maybe a few years down the line, I would think about what I wanted to do long term. But unfortunately, within 14 months of joining as a graduate, my company collapsed into bankruptcy. That company was called Lehman Brothers. And so that kickstarted the journey to where I am today, Ajay, because the next job that I went into was still in the financial industry, but it was a job that was killing my physical and mental energy. I was often into the workplace around 6 or 7 in the morning and not out until 10 or 11 at night. So very punishing hours. And so I was getting little rest and sleep. I was surviving on junk food and takeaway, and I just never found the time to exercise. And so I got to a point in which I completely burnt out. And it was a sort of awakening. It sort of got me thinking that if this job was going to kill my mental and physical energy, well, it wasn't a price worth paying. And so what I did is I handed in my resignation to the company shortly after, and I decided to change jobs still within finance because that was my background. That's the only thing I knew how to do, to something that was more kinder in a way to my physical and mental energy. So I ended up going into a 9-to-5 financial job, which was easier. It was less hours, and it gave me the time after work and on weekends to really start prioritizing my health and to focus on what I wanted to do long term. So that's really where the journey began, and also the understanding of how important our energy is. And when we lack it, we simply can't operate at our best.
Yeah, that's true. And keeping everything aside, all the productivity tools, time management and everything, energy is at the topmost thing when you're talking about productivity and a productive lifestyle. So tell us more about the role of energy in productivity, personal productivity.
Sure. So when most of us think about productivity, we focus straight on time management. We think that if we manage our time better, then we are more productive. But for me, the drawback of focusing exclusively on time management is that we assume that our energy is constant throughout the whole day. So when you open your diary and you start putting things into your calendar, if you just focus on time blocking activities and tasks to do without consideration to your energy, you could be working against your body. So if you were to put in your diary that at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you were going to go gym, Yet you know that your energy at 4 is going to be significantly lower than your energy earlier in the day. You are making it harder for yourself to actually follow through with that activity. So by switching around the activities we have and managing our diary with the insight of when we are at our highest levels of energy and our lowest levels, it means that we actually become more productive.
But Simon, that also is not constant. I mean, I do totally, first of all, I totally agree with the fact that if you write your time box, everything, I'm going to do this for 4 to 5, 5 to 6, and then you realize that, okay, 4 to 5, you're not in the energy to do that particular thing, and then everything is failed. So I totally agree with that. But to some extent, the similar thing happened with energy also, because for me, for example, I feel energetic in the evening hours for strange reasons, right? In morning, physically, I feel energetic. So I kind of do my gym and all physical exercise and everything. But the distribution of energy throughout the day is also not uniform every day.
Yeah.
Right? Sometimes you're like more energetic at 10 a.m. The other day you'll be like 6 p.m. So how do you address that?
Definitely. And all of us will have different energetic rhythms, Ajay. So that is why when we plan ahead, I often plan just one day ahead. So I plan my day the night before. And also during the day, we have to be open to adapt because things will happen. And things will happen that will, of course, affect our energy. And so we have to be mindful of that. Our body is always speaking to us. The question is, are we listening to it? And so by working with our body in that way, we can be adaptable to things throughout the day. So just to illustrate an example, I knew that coming up to the launch of my book, I would need significantly more energy than I would otherwise need if it was a typical working week. So what I did deliberately is I started to say no to more opportunities, invitations to events for these past couple of weeks in order to have the space to focus on this book launch. So that is using information on the energy that I'm going to need for something and creating a sort of environment that means I can focus on what is most important. And now this would be the same for us on a day-to-day basis. Now, some mornings you will wake up and say, I just don't feel particularly energized this morning. Now, instead of pushing yourself to do things just because you want to tick a box, what we have to do is actually be kinder to ourselves. Maybe this morning it's just about resting. Maybe it's just about doing a bit of reading, slowing down for a few hours before we start our work. And so that's why we have to begin listening to our own body so we can work with our energy. Otherwise, we end up burning out.
Yeah. And I think and that's the reason you start your book with keeping health as paramount. Because if you are healthy, then you are able to make those kind of decisions, right? Otherwise, you'll be like so sluggish in the morning that you don't even bother to pick up a book to read, right? Forget about reading.
Definitely. And the way I put it, Ajay, is that any tip, trick, or hack you get given is meaningless unless you've had sufficient rest and sleep, because you won't have the energy to put it into action. But if you've got a basic level of energy because you're addressing the foundational aspects of health, your sleep, your rest, your nutrition, and how much you move your body, then what happens is that you've got as good a foundation as a house would need or a tree would need in order to grow to their potential.
Yeah. And there was one catchy line in your book, which is stop treating your health as a side hustle. And it is so profound. And you would see people around you, majority of people actually not even consider it as a side hustle, right? At all. And you will see, people in different sizes and shapes. How can you inspire people, even if we know that health is so important? We have been through this pandemic and we have seen, if you are healthy, then you survive, or else, so many people have lost so many loved ones. Even then, when it comes to, eating habits, when it comes to being physically active, people are still not that aware. Well, you see a lot happening in online space, but how do you inspire everybody? When I want everybody to be, mindful of what do they eat, they should know where their health is, how they're going to look like in 5 years, and all those things. How do you inspire people who don't even consider it as a side hustle?
Well, first of all, this is why, Ajay, you cannot have self-development without self-awareness, because you can't change what you're not aware of. And so awareness is the beginning of any change. And when I when I work with clients, when I speak to audiences, for me, it's first about getting them aware of what their current conditions and lifestyle are, because we can't know what that next step is if we don't know where we are right now. And many of us don't, because we haven't really assessed if our lifestyle is working for us, against us. So almost the first step is to help raise people's awareness about their healthy habits. Are they actually helping you live a longer life, or are they actually killing you over the longer term? And so I think once we raise that level of awareness, that's when we begin to make subtle changes at the beginning before we start seeing the effects of them. And then we go, actually, well, I want to make a complete transformation into somebody who is healthy, somebody who prioritizes what they eat, how much they rest, and how much they move their body.
Right. So, and for my audience, I will tell that when you read the book, Simon has put a lot of 6-step kind of action plan. How do you identify where you are, where you want to be in 1 year, 2 year, 5 years, and those kind of things in different aspects. So when you will read the book, you will know it. So it's quite good tools that he has given. So coming back to the point here, Simon, people are too busy being stressed. And you also mentioned in the book, they're addicted to stress. And that's another thing that kind of bothers me. And it feels like nowadays it is a kind of status symbol. If you ask somebody, how was the week? I was like, very busy, very busy. When you tell somebody very busy, you feel so good. I'm like, I'm living a life worthwhile, right? So how do you break that habit of being busy? I mean, like, okay, I agree, like 50% of people who are saying busy are actually busy, but not everybody is, right? It is just a kind of become a habit of just saying it. It feels cool.
I think we are using the term busy as an excuse for not focusing on what is most important in our lives. It is a nice way to distract ourselves from the fact that maybe our life isn't where we want it to be. And so we use the fact that we're busy as a reason to justify why we're not doing the things deep down we know we must do. And I think part of that is also understanding that productivity is not always about doing. A lot of us think if I'm not doing something, then I'm lazy or I feel guilty because I'm not doing something. But actually, to step back, to pause, to enjoy life, to slow down is actually a superpower in a world that is getting increasingly fast. Now, you only have to look at the likes of Richard Branson or Warren Buffett to see for them that the integration of periods of rest, of enjoyment and fun is so important to their success. I mean, yes, we know that Richard Branson works hard, but at the same time, we know he enjoys life. I mean, how often do we see him jet skiing around his private island on Necker Island, having fun, flying a rocket to outside of the Earth's orbit? Warren Buffett even shows interviewers his diary, which is containing many blank pages, because he said, we shouldn't always be working and having back-to-back meetings. We should be actually enjoying this gift of life that we have, because there's no way to live to just be busy all the time. And so if we look at some examples of successful individuals and leaders, what we find is that it's not just about working hard, but it's also about periods of slowing down, periods of simply being. That is not all about the doing and being busy. That is, I think, where the world was years ago. It was all about FaceTime and how much you were in the office, whether you were doing work from certain hour to certain hour. But now it's about, well, if we give people the freedom to manage their own energy and time while meeting certain objectives, then what happens is that we give people the ownership of how they manage their energy and time. Now, with that, I think people could actually achieve more. But because we get them to have to report in at a certain time and finish at a certain time and adhere to certain principles and espouse this fact that we all have to be busy, then it actually has a counterproductive effect, because it actually results in more people feeling disengaged and unproductive.
So that's about the people who have kind of achieved substantially good amount of success, like Branson and people like that. But majority of people are not there. So majority of people are somewhere kind of competing with everybody else around them, right? And for them, if they see somebody doing something, then their fear of missing out will come to haunt them. And then they just want to catch up. And in that catching up, they can't relax, really.
Right? And And that is because they have put themselves on a hamster wheel in which they do not control the speed or direction of that wheel. And so in order for them to actually discover their own potential, they've got to move their energy away from FOMO and to JOMO, the joy of missing out. Because if you are stuck in the land of FOMO, then you never will get to enjoy your life, because you are giving up your enjoyment of life to what everyone else is doing. So when you look at what other people are doing and you have that feeling of FOMO, then suddenly you're living their life. You want to go and do the activities they're doing. You want to read the things they're reading. You want to measure your progress against their journey. And that is just no way to live. So by actually embracing a bit of JOMO in your life, the joy of missing out, you can begin to focus on what matters most to you. Because as Bronnie Ware, I'm sure you've read her book, The Top Regrets of the Dying, she wrote that the number one regret was, I wish I lived a life more true to myself than a life for others. And so what gets us exhausted, what gets us feeling that we have to be busy, is the fact that we're living a life for other people. But when we begin to live a life on our own terms, when we know what success means to us, what sort of impact we want to have, what fulfillment looks like, then we can rest easy knowing that we are doing the things and the tasks that actually bring us enjoyment.
Yeah, and you touched upon this, the book of Top 5 Regrets. And when I read those 5, they're like, wish I have spent time with somebody, wish I have done something with my time, something I wanted to do, and those kind of things. And they all kind of linked to how productive one can be. So if you're like super hyper productive, then you wouldn't have 4 out of those 5 regrets, right? So they kind of also connected, isn't it?
Definitely. I mean, it just shows that it is so important to focus on you. And it's not selfish, because until you focus on you, you cannot show up as your best self in the world, because you're living a lie. You're living a life as someone who you're really not. And so much of life, as we all know, when we are in the world of personal development, much of life is discovering who you are and then becoming it. And we are all born with unique gifts, talents, and skills. And it is one of life's greatest journeys to understand what those are, and then to be able to have the courage to express them with the world.
Yeah, that's so true. So let's go back to my previous question about energy and having throughout the day having the same energy levels and all. There was one concept that just came to my mind, which you wrote about in the book as well, is about the energy leaks. And I'm really keen to know more about that. What exactly you mean by energy leaks and how to kind of mend them so that you have substantially better energetic days.
Sure. So what happens is that, when we begin each day, we have a certain level of energy. And when we do things that sort of matter to us, that we enjoy, it actually gives us more energy. When we spend energy doing the things we enjoy, we get more energy from it. But what happens is that when we do things that drain us, when we spend time around negativity, whether that is places, people, or things, what happens is that we start depleting our energy reserves. So when we think about energy, it is infectious. But it doesn't matter if it's negative or positive. You just get more of whatever energy you spend your time around. So when you become conscious of the things that are draining you of energy and the things that give you energy, our challenge is to then focus more of our time on doing the things that actually give us energy. And when we do that, we are basically building the process, Ajay, of an environment that makes it impossible not to succeed. When we are shifting our time to focusing on the things that give us energy, that is the process of designing an environment around us that makes it impossible not to succeed.
So give me an example of a not memory leak, energy leak in let's say in your life, right? In whatever recently something happened, then you realize, oh, it's a leak, and you kind of mended it.
So sure. So one of the earliest energy leaks I had was getting caught up in things that I couldn't control. And one of these things was negative comments. So I think that whenever you show up in the world, when you put yourself out there, having a small number of people that simply dislike you for whatever reason is just part of the game. But at the beginning, it took a lot of my energy to worry about somebody writing on my first YouTube video, get a real job and learn how to speak English. And so I would get some comments like that on my social media from people I'd never met before, but yet they had a lot of opinion and views about what I was sharing. And that would cause me to have some energy leaks when I worried about those comments, and when I worried about how do I respond and how do I feed back to what they just shared. And so for me, what I did is I said to myself, knowing that this was affecting my energy, I said, I'm simply either going to delete it or I'm just going to ignore them. And that meant I didn't allow that to affect me energetically. And the analogy that comes to my mind as I share this with you now, Ajay, is imagine our mind is like a boat in the ocean, and we are working our way towards dry land. And in this case, dry land could be a goal or vision that you have for yourself. Now, of course, in the ocean that surrounds you, there will be plenty of negativity around you. And when we have awareness, we're able to keep out that negativity. But once we allow that ocean of negativity to come into our mind, in this case, our boat, what happens is we start to have a sinking feeling. The boat gets heavier, it starts sinking, and we can't make progress forward to dry land until we start emptying out all of that water so the boat can actually move forward. And it is the same thing with our mind. Unless we protect our energy for what is most important, we're going to leak energy left, right, and center.
Very good analogy. And the reason I was kind of laughing on that example of, somebody is criticizing on your work, and I've seen it too. The one belief that helps me is, you do whatever, how much ever good thing you do or anything evil you do, you will always have some fans and some people who will criticize you, always, at any level.
Yeah. Totally. I mean, even with speaking, I remember one of my mentors when I started speaking on stages and at conferences, Ajay, he said to me, Simon, when you go up on stage, there will be some people that will hate you, whatever you say. You can say the best things in the world. You can inspire the audience. They will still hate you. There will be some people that will love you. Whatever you say, they will love everything you say. And there will be a lot of people in the middle who just don't care. Who'll be like, that was a good talk. Next person. And so what you want to do is when you are on stage, focus on the people that will love what you do, because they are the people that would be most positively affected by what you share.
Yeah, and those were the people who were receptive to the change that you are planning to bring in your audience's life. So I think
definitely,
yeah, that's really cool. And while you were talking about, the leaks and the negative things, there is in one place in your book, you talked about something called negative visualization, which is not a new term, but I just looked at the perspective, how you're using it is to, changing your habits, think about negative more. And I was like, oh, is it not opposing the law of attraction kind of theories? And I don't know if you believe in that or not, but I really want you to tell that tool to our audience, to how one can use negative visualization to their betterment and to become more energized and more productive.
Sure. So for me, it's I mentioned and shared it in the book because I see it more as a compliment. So of course, we need to have a vision of what we want to achieve, something that excites us, something that is compelling and magnetic. And if we read it out loud, if we visualize it every day, we can make that real. But at the same time, just visualizing something and connecting to it doesn't mean it's going to happen. You still got to do something about it. You still got to take action. So the way that negative visualization works is that it complements that positive visualization by creating a sense of urgency. Because if you have no sense of urgency, you can have a great vision, but you just take no action towards it. And we're human. So all of us do have personal visions of what we want to achieve. Most of us just happen to also be lazy. So we don't take the action we know we've got to do to make things happen. And so this is where negative visualization comes in. We start to imagine things such as, what if I took no action on what I want to achieve by the time I'm sitting in my wheelchair at the age of 85 years old in the final few years of my life? So by putting it in that way, it creates a sense of urgency by forming a sense of pain, if you will, because sometimes we need a bit of pain to motivate us to take action. Somebody may be thinking for many years that they want to change careers, but they don't take any action until the very moment that they are made redundant. And then they got no choice because the pain has unleashed that desire to want to change. And so negative visualization is a great tool to create a sense of urgency towards that vision that we have.
Yeah, and I liked it. I like the you've actually given steps, how to question storm yourself, right? That's
Yeah.
another new word that I read in your book. I don't know if you invented it.
No, I think it's powerful. I first heard it actually in a training program I did years ago. And the trainer in that room said, I know that all of you have heard of brainstorming. And brainstorming is simply coming up with solutions to problems. So you sit there and you come up with lots of answers. But as you know, Ajay, in the field of coaching and personal development, the most powerful thing we can do sometimes is to ask a beautiful question. Because what a question does is it can unlock our creativity. It can actually end up creating more questions to ask. And that is great because it puts us on a path of discovery. It allows us to explore our curiosities. And so question storming is simply coming up with lots of different questions that we have about a situation or a particular project that we want to embark on. And those questions become the guide as to what those next steps are.
So, Simon, I was going to talk about questioning, and we were talking about question storming, and we had some technical issues, so we are now back. And I was saying that when you are question storming, asking questions, then you have more doubts than having some constructive questions. And that's where there's one more line that in the book that I really, really loved, which is when you doubt your powers, you give power to your doubts, right? It's somebody said it and you quoted it in the book. And I really found it really, really cool. So my question to you then is how not to doubt your powers when you see that millions of people have that power better than you?
Sure. Well, I think the way to avoid doubting our power is to realize that we also have a gift. And there is so many different ways that we can share that gift with the world. So I'll give an example. If there was only one book in the world that covered everything, which to be honest, it is impossible to cover every bit of knowledge there is out there, then you would go into the library and there would be only one book, the Bible of personal development. But you and I know there isn't because we have all gone through different experiences in life. We have different stories to tell. We have different lessons to share. And even though many of the lessons may be very similar, the way we share that and the way we tell it to the world will be very different because, of course, none of us have exactly the same background. And so it's just about understanding that you have a place in the world. I mean, if I doubted my power, Ajay, I would not have become a coach. I would not have become a speaker. I would not have become an author because, to be fair, there are a lot of people doing what I do in the world.
Yeah.
And so if I doubted my power by comparing myself negatively to them, I would have just not taken that first step. But for me, I didn't focus on the outcome. And there is a beautiful Zen saying that goes, be attached to no outcome and open to everything. And so for me, it was focus on one step at a time. That is it, one step at a time each day. And the beauty of doing this is that eventually you arrive at what is meant for you. And even if it is just one step, a year from now, that is 365 steps forward. I mean, just imagine who and where you could be.
Yeah, but I mean, there are no buts in this, and one should not doubt their powers. And very rightly mentioned you that there is no one book of personal development. And there is one more aspect to that I would like to add is the personal development and reading book. If somebody came to me and they said, oh no, every book is writing more or less the same thing, and why should I read another personal development book? And I was like, what, you are eating more or less the same food the whole year, why to eat tomorrow, right? So I personally believe that every book comes with this different experience and perspective, as you mentioned, but also it gives you food for your brain. And keep momentum. I mean, you have a chapter on momentum in the book as well, right? And which is so important. And yeah, so definitely, I totally agree with the points that you've just raised. Should not doubt your powers and just do one step at a time and focus on one step at a time, get a result, and then move on. Great. But I'm sorry I'm asking so many but questions. But let's say you believed in you didn't doubt your powers, you did something, and then you failed. right? And then a lot of people will say, oh, you know what, failure is another step into your success and all good positive things. And you came up with an acronym for that, RISE, which is another cool thing. Tell us more about how do you bounce back from the failures using your framework, which I'm going to give for free to my audience with your permission, about RISE with all the acronyms, please.
Sure. Well, first of all, RISE stands for R being reframe. I is about immersing yourself in inspiration. S is for self-compassion, and E is for energy switching. Now, that is how we can respond in a way that is productive rather than something that is unhealthy for us. Because when we focus on things that we can't control, we become paralyzed by overthinking. We get caught up in worrying about things that we cannot influence. But when we focus on things that we can control, that is when we become energized and empowered to take action. So just going through that acronym very quickly, our reframe is simply about seeing the opportunity in lesson with whatever happens, not to judge it as a failure to be a defining moment, but to see it for the lesson that it is. So to reframe our experience of that event. And it's a powerful step, actually, when you think about it, because we live in the feeling of our thinking moment to moment to moment. And our thought is like the colors of a paintbrush. The paintbrush is our mind, and the colors that we pick create our reality. At any given moment, we can choose a different color to paint on our canvas. And by choosing a different color of thought, we thereby change the reality that we live in. So that's what I'm talking about when I say reframe. You have the power to frame any event to any meaning that you like. And when you can do that in a positive way, it changes your experience of it. Now, go on.
Give us an example.
Sure. So
day-to-day life example.
So if I look at some of my failures in life, and I'm going to reference a couple. So the first is when I wouldn't call it failure, but I guess sort of big life events is when I was 17, I lost my mom. When I was at university, I failed my second year of university. Now, both of us coming from Asian backgrounds, Ajay, you can imagine what it must have been like to tell your parents that you have failed.
Not allowed.
And then the first job that I started was at Lehman Brothers, which collapsed after 14 months after I started. My first two businesses failed. And so I have gone through many challenges and failures in my life. But to show you what I mean by reframe is each of those I have discovered serve a purpose. When my mom passed away when I was 17, it taught me very powerfully the fragility of life. And that's what I took it as, a lesson of how short life is and how important it is to follow through with the things that you want to do. At university, when I failed my second year, I took it as a sign that maybe I wasn't meant for employment. And actually, which is quite interesting, is that if I didn't fail my second year, I would not have met the woman that has now become my wife. So that would not have occurred because I would already be in the world of work. If I look at the collapse of Lehman Brothers, I reframed that to a blessing in disguise, because if it wasn't for the financial crisis, I may not even be speaking with you today, Ajay. I probably would still be in the world of finance. But because the crisis happened, it got me questioning what I was doing and whether it was something I wanted to do for the long term. And again, when my first two businesses failed, I sought the lessons in them. I looked for what I could take away from those failures to make sure I didn't do again in the next business I did. Fortunately, that next business became what I do today, which has worked out quite nicely. But these are ways that we can reframe those events to be something that actually acts as fuel for us coming back stronger.
So we will go to your I, S, and E also, but onto this reframing point again. You know, when we look back on those events which have happened months and years ago, we can say that, okay, I kind of did the reframing, but when it is happening exactly, and when you are into kind of not in the state of mind to really, think about thinking any positive that can come out of this experience, how do you, advise people to deal with that kind of situation?
First step, pause. Disconnect yourself from the moment, because if you don't disconnect yourself from the moment, you can get easily caught up with emotion. And often it is emotion you cannot control. So that's the first step, to pause so you can see things objectively. The second step is to ask yourself the question, what else could this mean? And it's a good question, because what we realize is that there is always a different way to see what had happened. Now, we can't always see it in a moment, but I think when we ask ourselves more intentionally the question, what else could this mean? It opens it up to different forms of interpretation. So those would be the two steps I would take in the moment when you are going through something that is a setback or failure.
Yeah, and I think I totally agree. It's such a short first step, pause, and it is so difficult, and people just overlook because they just can't pause when they are into a difficult, they're having a difficult experience. So I think really, really powerful that is. And again, I tell my audience once again to check out the book that Simon has written. There are many such practical tools that you can use in your day-to-day life, really. So, Simon, we've only covered R of Rise. We still have to do ISE.
Sure. So I is about immersing yourself in inspiration. Now, what this does is it can change not only how you view what had happened, but it can also help you relate to the fact that other people go through exactly what you've gone through, and they've gone on to make something more of it. So for me, when I go through challenges of failure, what I do to immerse myself in inspiration is I watch a documentary, I read a book, I listen to somebody on the podcast who is sharing about their own life story. And that process of immersing myself in their inspiration motivates me to come back stronger, because it puts everything in perspective. It makes me think, well, if this individual was able to achieve so much, but he had no limbs and he was able to achieve what he has achieved, man, this failure doesn't look that much of a failure after all. I can actually turn this around, because if this individual saw himself having failed at birth, he would never have done the things that he has done. But because he saw it as a gift, he saw it as the fact that he was born special, he reframed his experience. And that, me immersing myself in his inspiration, naturally makes me want to come back stronger.
S, self-compassion.
S is all about self-compassion, because often when we fail or we experience a setback, we can be harsh to ourselves. We can speak down to ourselves. Why was I that stupid that this happened? Maybe I'm not ready yet. And so we can start to really put ourselves down. And so S is all about self-compassion. When these things happen, they are simply an event, but they don't define who you are. Just because you failed, it does not make you a failure. And so what we can often do is, when we have failed at something, we can say, oh, I'm a failure. I'm not meant to do this. And so we end up stopping ourselves from learning from what had happened. We just use it as a dead end. We stop ourselves from making progress. So self-compassion is about, when these things happen in your life, approach it with a bit of curiosity and a bit of compassion. Understand what had happened, understand what is the lesson there, but really be compassionate to yourself, be kind to yourself when you go through that situation. Just understand that all of us are going through challenges. It is a part of human nature that we all face obstacles and challenges at some point. So speak to yourself in the same way that you would to people you deeply care about.
And how do you switch the energy finally?
Definitely. E is all about energy switch. So sometimes if something hasn't gone the way I wanted, and I may feel a little frustrated, Ajay, I will hit the gym. I will go for a swim. I will run outdoors. I will do something that will shift my energy into a much more positive state. And it's powerful. If you have just heard some bad news, if you just failed at something, and then you hit the gym or you go boxing, you do something that just shifts your energy around. What happens is, when you come back, you start to see it in a very different light.
That's true. And when you were talking about, so just to summarize for the people, RISE, that's a framework. So reframing, immerse yourself in inspiration, self-compassion, and energy switching. I really like that. When you were talking about reframing, Simon, and you talked about focus and your interest and distractions and things like that, and that reminds me of another thing that you wrote in the book about understanding the difference between your interests and your commitments, because the interests love distraction and commitment loves progress.
Mm.
Right? It's really powerful, really, really powerful. You've written that. And I really want you to kind of drill down a little bit more. What is the relation between interest and distraction, and how you can make your interests your commitments?
Sure. So first of all, I guess what I mean by interest and commitment is the way that we approach the things that we want to do.
Yeah.
So let's say you begin a new year and there's things that you want to accomplish in the year ahead. Now, for many of us, those things are just interests.
Yeah.
So we have this long list of things that we would like to do. So it could be, I'm interested in being healthy. I'm interested in changing jobs. I'm interested in starting that business. Now, the challenge for us is that if we are only interested, that on itself is not sufficient for us to take action. Because you and I will probably know many people that are interested in sleeping more, interested in working out more, interested in starting their own business. But do they do it? No, they don't do it. And that is because they're only interested. And when you are interested only, your mind hasn't made a decision. Your mind is 50-50. It's neither in or it's out. You're sort of maybe, and that means you haven't decided. Whereas when you have committed, when you have made a commitment, suddenly your language changes. Yeah. Interest is me saying, I should and I need. Commitment is I must and I will. And you can sense when somebody's committed. You know, when you talk to somebody and say, what are you looking to do in the next week in terms of your work? And they say to you, well, you know, on Monday, I must ring this person. And by Friday, I will be doing this. You know from their language, they're committed. But when somebody says to you, I need to really be starting this next week, and I hope I should be able to do this by the end of the month. Now, you already know chances are they're probably not going to do it. Yeah. And so you can sense when people are merely interested or they are committed. And until we make that walk over the bridge from interest to commitment, it is very difficult to take action, because only once we are committed to something do we allow our mind to jump to the how question. And for me, that is a beautiful space to be in, because when we start asking ourselves how, that is the precursor to action. Now we're saying, well, because I must do this, how will I do it? So now the brain is seeking solutions. How am I going to send that email? How am I going to shoot that video? How am I going to start my business? You're starting to lay out the foundation of action steps to help you move forward.
Yeah. So when you make a commitment, chances are that you will achieve that. Like you made a commitment to write a book, you wrote it, and that makes me curious to just to learn from your experience. How did your book writing, is your first book, how did your book writing journey went through, and especially how did you end up having a renowned publisher also for the first book? Can you give us some kind of guidelines on how should one approach?
Definitely. So just to lay out a bit of the backstory, in the middle of 2019, so in August, I like to take that time to review my year and also to plan the next few months of the year, because August tends to be quieter. Many people are taking holidays, and it tends to be a slower period of the year. Now, at that time, there was a list of things that I wanted to do in terms of longer term projects. Of course, writing a book was on there, but it wasn't sort of the top 3 of the things that I wanted to do. And then a couple of months later, I got approached by a boutique publisher with an interest for me to write a book with them. Unfortunately, I didn't want to move ahead because I felt that the offer wasn't a win-win scenario. However, that conversation got me thinking, maybe it is a sign that I'm meant to start thinking about writing a book. And so what I did, Ajay, is I started to connect with some of the biggest publishers on the planet. I started to connect with HarperCollins, Penguin, Hay House, Simon & Schuster, you know, all these publishing houses that we know who have published books that we read. And I didn't hear back for a number of weeks. It was silence, as I expected, because they probably get a lot of inquiries and messages from people like me. Yeah. And then it wasn't until January 2020 in which I received an email from Penguin saying, Simon, we would like to have a conversation to hear about what you have in mind about a potential book. Now, up until this point, I had no idea what I was going to write about. because I just didn't think I would get an email back to say, would you like to have a conversation? So I thought, why start planning if I get no response? And so I go along, we have a conversation, and that lasts maybe a few months of back and forth, and also me putting together a book proposal before I get the offer to write a book. And I'm going to say now, Ajay, that writing this book has been the greatest challenge that I have undertaken so far. And I don't mean to say it is a challenge because writing a book is always a challenge, because especially when you've never written a book before. What I mean by this is it was even more of a challenge for me because just before I got the book deal, I became a parent for the first time. And this was at a time in which the world went into lockdown. So just imagine that your partner and yourself are running a business, and you have to adapt the business to a world that is radically different to what it was pre-pandemic. And then you've just given birth to a new child, and your parents are not in the same city as you, because my wife's family is in America, my dad and his partner are in Australia, and so nobody can come over to support you. And so not only do you have to learn how to parent a child for the first time and adapt your business, because otherwise you don't get a paycheck, you've also got to now write a 65,000 word book. So for me, it became one of my greatest challenges. And although it was challenging, it also taught me so much. I mean, I got to know about myself at such a deep level, Ajay, by writing this book, because it gets you to slow down and really reflect on your journey. And I think that process is something few of us have experienced. So for me to be able to do that over the last couple of years has been as beautiful as it has been challenging.
I'm sure the book is going to be a super successful one. And if I understand it correctly, you said that when you first wrote to Penguin, you didn't have idea of what you were going to write about. Then how did you pitch? What was your email?
I didn't pitch at all. I just reached out, and I just sort of wanted to have a coffee just to sort of learn more about the book industry and to learn more about the book process. I simply shared that I had a couple of ideas, and that was it. I guess I just thought, why not? I mean, if you never ask, you never know.
Yeah.
So I put it out there, and I tried to make it as personal as I could. I tried to go to some launch events by authors that some of these publishing houses had already signed, so that I could try and understand what they were looking for. I could maybe try and meet some of these people at these events. So I basically tried to come from a place of relationship building rather than pitching straight away. And so I wanted to start building a relationship first before I shared any of my ideas.
Good. That's good to know. And I think that's Cal Newport, or is there an author like Newport?
Yeah, Cal Newport.
Cal Newport. Yeah, not Cal. So I think in one of his interview, he says that when you are about to write a book, first find a publisher and agree the deal, and then you start thinking about what you're going to write. That's how he has written. I think, I don't know, 3-4 books. He's a kind of serial book author.
Yeah, he's a serial book author. And when I think about inspirational authors, the two for me who are the most inspiring in my field, I would say, are Ryan Holiday and Matt Haig, because both of them are prolific at writing. They have written so many books over the years. And for me as a first-time author, it is very inspiring to have their influence in my life in terms of the quality of books they've written and just the sheer number of books they've written.
Yeah. Okay, great. So someday, one day, soon, with a date. Okay, Simon, I'm really enjoying this conversation, but unfortunately, in the interest of your time, and we'll have to summarize it. But before we go, there's one question that I've asked all my guests so far, which is, what, according to you, are the top 3 skills that schools are not teaching, but one needs to have?
Top 3 skills that schools are not teaching, but I need to have. Good question, because I think there are a lot of things that schools could be teaching that they are not. I would say the first one that comes to my mind is communication and presentation skills. Because I think that when you get out into the world of work, a lot of your success comes down to your ability to articulate your thoughts in a way that can influence. And that comes down to being able to present to a room or communicate to people in your place of work or even within the industry that you operate in. So the first one will be communication and presentation skills. The second for me would be mindfulness. Now, mindfulness has had a huge impact in schools that have actually embraced this activity. In the book, actually, I share a story of Visitation High School in San Francisco and the results of them applying mindfulness-based principles into their curriculum. And I think the key reason for this is that it teaches children how to manage their attention and also to understand that you don't always have to be in doing mode to feel productive, that actually by slowing down, it helps you speed up. So mindfulness would be the second one there. And the third one for me would be technical skills, would be the skills that we need in today's world. I mean, many schools are still teaching the same subjects that I studied when I was first at school. Yet for me, it would make far more sense to teach the students of today things such as social media, graphic design, coding. We have to have a curriculum that adapts to the world, that adapts to where the world is. And so I would say technical skills that adapt to where the world is would be very useful for the students of tomorrow.
Great. Thank you very much for sharing that, Simon. And thanks a lot for taking a time out and talking to me. It was amazing reading the book, but talking to the author himself is adding to the experience quite a lot of good insight. So thank you very much for that. And guys, if you have found some value from this interview, I will highly recommend go out and check Energize. It's a great book, quite a lot of tools, good, easy reading. I think around 230, 40 pages. Do read it. And if you know how to fast read books, then check out my another video, which is somewhere here. And then up until our next episode, you keep learning and stay healthy. Thank you. And people like that.
Oh, that was